Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel The Territory of Cinema. If you're new here, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. Today we are going to be discussing the 1998 movie Rush Hour proper. The opening, set against the glittering backdrop of Hong Kong, immediately establishes the sheer kinetic energy that defines this particular brand of action comedy. We meet Inspector Lee, a man whose dedication to justice is as sharp as his flawless martial arts technique, a legacy clearly inherited from the disciplined world of Hong Kong cinema, where precision and honor are paramount. His current case, the kidnapping of the daughter of a powerful consulate official, forces him into an uncomfortable alliance with the American side. Enter Detective James Carter, a fast-talking, overly confident LAPD officer from robbery homicide. Carter, whose career trajectory has been fueled more by bravado and street smarts than by methodical procedure, feels like the embodiment of early 90s buddy cop tropes. Loud, flashy, and decidedly not discreet. He's practically yanked onto the case as a liaison, much to his own delighted surprise, seeing it as his ticket to the big leagues, even if his actual competence remains up for debate. The culture clash is immediate and jarring. Lee, meticulously focused on retrieving the child and respecting protocol, views Carter as an undisciplined annoyance. Carter sees Lee as a humorless, uptight foreigner who doesn't understand the American way of doing things. Their initial efforts in Los Angeles are a spectacular series of near misses and property damage, punctuated by Carter's constant, stream-of-consciousness commentary, contrasting sharply with Lee's terse observations. As they begin to untangle the conspiracy, which involves smuggled artifacts and whispers of a powerful crime lord known only as Juntao, their individual strengths start to mesh, albeit reluctantly. Lee's background in martial arts and his unwavering focus prove invaluable when navigating the shadowy underworld of international smuggling rings. Carter, meanwhile, proves surprisingly adept at navigating the less formal, more chaotic aspects of Los Angeles life, using his social leverage and tendency to improvise where Lee would prefer a plan. It's the classic pairing, the rigid technician meeting the flexible improviser. A critical turning point involves a botched attempt to secure information, leading to Lee being officially taken off the case by his FBI handlers, who find his methods too aggressive. This forces the partnership into the unauthorized realm, pushing them deeper into the conspiracy, where they uncover that the kidnapping is tied to a much larger operation involving former associates of Lee's deceased mentor. The realization that Juntao is someone Lee knows intimately provides the emotional anchor for the escalating action sequences. The climax takes place during a grand cultural exhibition. The villains, now revealed to be far closer to the perceived allies than expected, unleash chaos. Lee is forced to confront his past, realizing that the betrayal came from within the trusted circle. The ensuing fight is a beautiful, brutal ballet that showcases Lee's mastery of close-quarters combat against a highly skilled opponent, reflecting the exacting training seen in classic Hong Kong action films. Carter, finally stepping up not just with noise but with genuine, if clumsy, heroism, manages to save the day from a distance, demonstrating growth beyond his initial showboating. In the end, the child is safe, the villains are apprehended, and the initial antagonism between Lee and Carter dissolves into a grudging, genuine respect. Lee learns to relax his rigid adherence to form, perhaps adopting a sliver of Carter's chaotic energy, while Carter gains a deeper appreciation for discipline and focus. They part ways, not just as colleagues, but as men who have proven that even the most mismatched elements can find a working synergy under pressure. The early scenes of their reluctant partnership really highlight the friction. Lee, stepping off the plane, carries himself with an almost palpable sense of duty. You can sense the years spent honing his craft, training under the esteemed mentorship that is so vital in the Hong Kong police structure, always aiming for that perfect, clean resolution. Contrast that with Carter, whose entrance is less an arrival and more an explosion of neon and loud opinions. He's the product of American police dramas where charisma often outweighs paperwork, always ready with a quip, viewing Lee's seriousness as a personal challenge to his own relaxed approach to police work. Their first drive around Los Angeles is almost unbearable to watch from Lee's perspective. Carter bombards him with pop culture references and attempts at forced camaraderie, while Lee observes everything with the narrowed focus of a predator tracking prey. The city is a sprawling, distracting maze compared to the tightly controlled environments he's used to. The destruction caused during their efforts to follow leads, the market scene is a perfect example, isn't just collateral damage. For Lee, it's a profound failure of control, a stark contrast to the disciplined environment he strives to maintain in his professional life. As they delve deeper, the emotional stakes rise particularly for Lee. The missing girl isn't just a case. The kidnapping echoes the failure to protect his own mentor, creating a deeply personal drive that Carter initially misinterprets as mere stubbornness. Carter's background, often focused on street-level busts and quick results, finds itself ill-equipped for the sophisticated international web they uncover. Yet his very lack of formality allows him to make contacts Lee would never approach. The flashy nightclub scenes, for instance, are entirely Carter's territory, where he uses charm and misdirection to pry open doors closed to the meticulous inspector. When the FBI steps in and benches Lee, the raw frustration is visible. Lee operates best when he is in direct control, executing the precise maneuvers he has trained for decades to perfect. Being sidelined forces him to rely on Carter's unorthodox methods, pushing him outside his comfort zone and revealing a vulnerability beneath the stoic exterior. It's in these moments of shared peril, often involving close-quarters gun battles or frantic chases, that Carter stops being just a nuisance and starts becoming a necessary variable. He's the chaos factor Lee needs to disrupt the well-laid plans of Juntao, who, as the story reveals, understands Lee's own meticulous thinking because he was once part of that world too. The final confrontation isn't just about rescue. It's a philosophical showdown between two styles of justice. Lee's final duel, a testament to the rigorous physical storytelling found in the best martial arts features, is about reclaiming honor. Carter's involvement, though less refined, shows a genuine evolution. He uses his quick wits not just to brag, but to actively support Lee when it matters most, proving that he can occasionally rise above the noise. The shared success leaves them both changed. Lee perhaps a little looser around the edges, finally recognizing that sometimes the messiness of American individualism yields results, and Carter with a newfound respect for the quiet, unwavering commitment required to achieve true justice. The initial friction between the two men wasn't merely professional, it was deeply personal, rooted in their vastly different upbringings and professional ideologies. Lee's entire demeanor screamed dedication to the craft of policing as an art form, influenced by the structured, often intense atmosphere of Hong Kong cinema training, where every movement and decision is calculated. His grief over his mentor's death lent an almost tragic solemnity to his pursuit of the kidnappers, making every deviation from protocol a personal affront. He carried the weight of expectation, that flawless execution which defines the heroes of his cinematic heritage. Carter, on the other hand, was the unfiltered product of L.A. swagger. His career narrative seemed written by Hollywood screenwriters favoring instant gratification. He was loud, constantly moving, and desperate to project an image of being completely in control, even when he clearly was not. When he attempts to bond with Lee over music or slang, it feels less like genuine outreach and more like an aggressive attempt to assimilate the foreigner into his own chaotic worldview. This constant need to fill the silence is a coping mechanism for the underlying fear that perhaps his quick and dirty methods aren't sufficient when facing something truly organized and sinister. The scene in the vibrant, crowded marketplace, where Lee attempts to follow protocol while Carter insists on aggressive interrogation, is a masterclass in escalating misunderstanding. For Lee, watching the ensuing pandemonium, the overturned stalls, the near misses with innocent bystanders, is watching his own control unravel. He sees not just property damage, but the visual representation of chaos triumphing over order. His internal monologue, if we could hear it, would be a litany of exasperated sighs regarding the American lack of respect for spatial awareness and restraint. When the FBI sidelines Lee, the mandated inactivity is torturous for him. It forces him into the passenger seat of his own investigation, a position entirely foreign to a man whose entire identity is built on being the driving force. This surrender of control is what ultimately pushes him to accept Carter's brand of improvisation. Carter, despite his flaws, possesses an intuitive grasp of the streets and a network of low-level contacts that Lee, constrained by official procedure, could never access. It is in those grimy back alleys and loud, poorly lit establishments that Carter's street smarts finally prove their worth, showcasing that sometimes the polished technique must yield to the necessary grime. The reveal of Juntao's identity hits Lee like a physical blow, instantly transforming the case from a jurisdictional squabble into a profound act of personal reckoning. The enemy wasn't just some distant criminal mastermind. He was someone who shared Lee's formative experiences, twisting the discipline Lee reveres into a tool for corruption. This betrayal validates Lee's initial distrust of the softness of the American system, yet simultaneously forces him to realize that he cannot win this fight alone, that the isolation of pure discipline leaves one vulnerable to treachery from within. The final shootout and confrontation are choreographed not just for action, but as a payoff for their character arcs. Lee's precise, brutal fighting style against Juntao is a purging of his own lingering doubt and grief. Meanwhile, Carter's contribution, perhaps involving an unexpectedly accurate shot or a perfectly timed distraction, signifies his maturation. He stops playing the loud-mouthed clown and steps into the role of a genuine partner, leveraging his quick thinking to protect the more vulnerable asset, Lee, in that moment of intense focus. The resolution isn't a return to the status quo, it's an integration. Lee walks away with a slightly looser posture, perhaps ready to laugh at a genuinely terrible joke, and Carter understands that real heroism often requires an uncomfortable amount of quiet, dedicated work. They forged a bond in the crucible of danger, proving that mutual respect can bloom even from the most aggressively contrasting personalities. The aftermath of the resolution sees the dust settling not just physically, but emotionally, on the frayed edges of their partnership. There is a quiet acknowledgement between them, a wordless summary of the chaos they navigated. Lee, having faced down the personal ghost embodied by Juntao, seems slightly lighter, the severe set of his shoulders subtly eased. One can imagine him later, perhaps reviewing case files, allowing a small, genuine smile to touch his lips when recalling one of Carter's more absurd antics, a rare concession to the illogical, yet effective energy of his counterpart. This tentative opening suggests a departure from the rigid doctrines he was raised under. He's learned that efficiency doesn't always equate to strict adherence to the manual. Carter, for his part, appears subtly humbled, though he'd never fully admit it. The adrenaline high of saving the day has faded, replaced by the sober realization that his brash methods, while sometimes useful for initiating contact, nearly cost lives. We see him perhaps pausing before delivering a retort, glancing at Lee as if gauging the potential reaction, a small but significant indicator that he has internalized the value of calculated restraint. His usual need to dominate the conversation seems lessened, replaced by a newfound, albeit awkward, appreciation for listening. It is the transition from the self-proclaimed star of the show to a functional ensemble player, a subtle growth in professionalism that transcends his usual desire for superficial credit. The final scenes hint at a future, even if it is one where they remain geographically separated. There is the understanding that the specific alchemy required to stop Juntao will likely never be replicated in their day-to-day duties, The blend of Lee's disciplined, almost spiritual devotion to martial law and Carter's messy, improvisational American street sense is too unique to be sustained indefinitely in bureaucratic settings, yet the foundation is laid for an improbable cross-cultural friendship. They have seen the worst of each other's habits and the best of each other's capabilities. The experience hasn't transformed them into mirror images, which would be uninteresting, but rather into necessary complements. Lee will return to Hong Kong carrying the subtle lesson that sometimes you have to break things to fix the deeper problem, while Carter will likely treat his future partners with a slightly more considered respect, perhaps even attempting to understand the paperwork before setting off the first explosive distraction. Their story concludes not with a promise of constant reunion, but with the indelible mark left by an enforced, high-stakes collaboration that redefined what each man thought was possible within the boundaries of law enforcement. The lasting impression left by their whirlwind adventure is one of mutual, albeit begrudging, professional validation. For Lee, the quiet return to the ordered structure of the Hong Kong police force would be punctuated by moments of stark contrast. He would find the routine paperwork almost unbearably slow, perhaps tapping his pen with an impatience born from having operated at the speed of crisis. Yet, when addressing junior officers, one might detect a subtle shift in his instruction. Where before there was only the rigid recitation of protocol, now there might be a caveat, a reluctant acknowledgement that in certain unpredictable situations, an unorthodox, albeit risky maneuver might be necessary to achieve the ultimate goal of justice. He carries the memory of Carter's reckless abandon not as a scar, but as a strange kind of inoculation against pure rigidity. He understands now that the American system, for all its glaring flaws in procedure, values a kind of immediate, visceral problem-solving that can occasionally bypass bureaucratic stagnation. Carter's reintegration into the LAPD environment would be amusingly awkward. His colleagues, expecting the same bombastic performance, would be met with a Carter who is slightly more watchful, slightly less eager to monopolize the conversation. When briefing a superior, he might find himself instinctively organizing his points before launching into the narrative, a habit likely absorbed from watching Lee dismantle a complex situation with surgical precision. Furthermore, the shared experience of confronting a betrayal from within the ranks, something Lee understood intimately from the culture of his mentors, would give Carter a new gravity. He'd look at his precinct partners with a renewed, if cynical, awareness that danger often wears the most familiar face. He might even make a fleeting, poorly timed joke about needing to check his partner's loyalty before an arrest, only to realize his own punchline has fallen flat, prompting a genuine moment of self-correction rather than reflexive defiance. The true beauty of their concluded partnership lies in the fact that neither fully converts the other. Lee does not suddenly start dressing in loud suits or adopting Carter's slang. His inherent discipline is too deeply ingrained. Conversely, Carter does not suddenly adopt the stoic, disciplined lifestyle of an international inspector. His need for noise and immediate feedback remains vital to his functioning. Instead, they achieve a rare state of complementary competence. They prove that discipline needs spontaneity to avoid rigidity, and spontaneity needs discipline to avoid destruction. The memory of their shared danger acts as an invisible tether, a silent understanding that should the stakes ever rise high enough again, they possess the unique, bizarre skill set required to navigate the resulting mayhem. Their story ends less as a conclusion and more as a successful, if improbable, merging of two distinct cinematic archetypes, confirming that in the right context, opposites don't just attract, they solve the case. The final farewell at the airport, a moment often reduced to a quick handshake in these types of narratives, carried an unexpected resonance between the two men. It wasn't a tearful parting, nor was it overly sentimental. Their bond was forged in gunfire and cultural misunderstanding, making theatrical displays unnecessary. Instead, there was a shared look, a quick, efficient acknowledgement that spoke volumes. Lee, ever the master of economy and gesture, offered a slight nod that lacked its earlier stiffness, perhaps even holding eye contact a fraction of a second longer than was strictly professional. This small concession spoke volumes about the thaw in his otherwise impenetrable reserve. He was leaving the chaos of Los Angeles, but he was taking back something intangible, a practical lesson in letting go of absolute control. Carter, standing there in his slightly rumpled suit, seemed to contain his usual kinetic energy for once. He resisted the urge to deliver a final, lengthy monologue about the experience. Instead, the words that finally came out were surprisingly direct, perhaps stripped down by the seriousness of their shared trial. He might have simply clapped Lee on the shoulder, a gesture Lee tolerated with surprising patience, and muttered something about keeping in touch, a promise that sounded both sincere and utterly impractical given their separate continents. This restraint from Carter was perhaps the greatest sign of his evolution. He understood that some victories required silence, not boasting. Looking ahead, their careers will be forever subtly marked by this alliance. Lee, back in Hong Kong, might find himself analyzing crime scenes not just for adherence to form, but for the points where improvisation might have been overlooked by the original investigators. He's still the meticulous technician, but the blinders are off. He can now recognize the utility in the unexpected deviation. His colleagues might notice a slight, almost imperceptible shift in his leadership style, less command, more guided suggestion, allowing his subordinates a small margin for error that he previously would never have permitted. Carter's future investigations will be littered with tiny, subconscious echoes of Lee. Perhaps during a tense stakeout, he'll find himself automatically checking the perimeter with a focused intensity rather than just leaning against the car. Or maybe he'll resist the urge to immediately shout at a suspect, opting instead for a moment of quiet observation before initiating contact. He will forever possess a built-in internal auditor, a stern, silent Asian inspector, ready to challenge his most impulsive decisions. The relationship served as a high-intensity, short-term graduate course in international police work for both, shattering their insular views on effectiveness. They proved that while style and philosophy may clash violently, competency, when faced with true villainy, finds a way to align. Their story isn't about becoming friends in the traditional sense, but about becoming necessary mirrors for each other's professional souls. The lingering impact of their collision extends beyond mere professional adjustments. It subtly redefines their individual identities within their respective spheres. For Lee, the return to the familiar, high-stakes environment of Hong Kong CID offers a strange sense of anticlimax after the visceral intensity of the Los Angeles operation. He settles back into the rhythm of procedure, but the quiet moments, perhaps during solitary training sessions where his focus is absolute, are now colored by the memory of Carter's relentless, almost exhausting optimism. Lee begins to understand that true resilience isn't just about enduring external pressure. It's also about managing the internal pressure of perfectionism. He might even find himself occasionally employing a slightly broader smile when greeting a longtime trusted colleague, a subtle loosening of the emotional vice grip that held him so tightly before the kidnapping. This small shift in demeanor is interpreted by his peers not as weakness, but as a seasoned confidence. The confidence of someone who has seen the abyss of betrayal and navigated it using unexpected tools. Carter's journey back to the familiar swagger of the LAPD is decidedly bumpier, defined by an internal wrestling match between his established persona and the glimpses of effectiveness he witnessed in Lee. He tries, initially, to reassert his old dominance, launching into stories filled with exaggerated exploits, but the impact is diminished. His usual audience, perhaps sensing a new undercurrent of seriousness in their partner, reacts with less enthusiastic awe. Carter finds himself frequently replaying critical moments in his head, not the explosions, but the moments where Lee's silent judgment almost derailed a plan, or conversely, the moment where Lee's precise action saved his life. This critical self-assessment leads him to a surprising development. He starts valuing efficiency over volume. In precinct meetings, instead of dominating the floor with anecdote, he occasionally cuts straight to the core of the problem, a sharp, concise analysis that shocks his old partners who are used to his verbose meandering. He's developing a Lee-like precision in his communication, often baffling his colleagues who can't quite place why their resident comedian has suddenly become intermittently thoughtful. The narrative thread connecting them is, perhaps ironically, the very thing that brought them together: the threat of corruption operating under a veneer of respectability. Having both been burned by a trusted insider, Lee by Juntao and Carter by the suggestion that the case was being intentionally derailed by internal forces, they share a profound, unspoken understanding of how easily systems designed for order can be subverted by calculated malice. This shared trauma solidifies their bond far more effectively than any forced camaraderie ever could have. They realize that their differences, the East-West, discipline-chaos dichotomy, were precisely what made them effective against an enemy who exploited the blind spots inherent in any single, rigid viewpoint. They didn't just solve a crime, they validated a broader philosophy of necessary duality in complex endeavors. The silence that hangs between them now, when they occasionally exchange coded, brief messages across the Pacific, is not empty, but full of the weight of shared, life-altering experience, the quiet understanding that beneath the performance, they both respect the hustle, no matter the style. The enduring legacy of their enforced partnership surfaces most acutely in their approach to surveillance and evidence gathering. Lee, steeped in a tradition where physical tracking and meticulous observation are paramount, a method honed by necessity in the dense, watchful environment of Hong Kong, now views American technology with a newfound, if skeptical, appreciation. He recognizes the efficiency of the surveillance vans and digital intercepts Carter utilized, but he still harbors a preference for boots on the ground. Yet, where before he would have dismissed Carter's use of informants in dimly lit bars as unprofessional noise, Lee now sees the value in that messy, human intelligence gathering. He understands it as a necessary counterbalance to the sterile data collection favored by the FBI, whose methods, he's painfully aware, can be easily misled or corrupted by carefully planted false trails. Carter, conversely, starts incorporating elements of Lee's almost meditative patience into his fieldwork. There are anecdotes circulating in the precinct, likely embellished, about Detective Carter spending an unprecedented amount of time simply observing a location without immediately kicking down the door or engaging in a loud confrontation. This calculated pause, this moment of deliberate stillness before the storm, is a direct inheritance from Lee's martial arts philosophy. Wait for the opponent to reveal their weakness before committing. This new patience frustrates some of his more impulsive partners who demand immediate gratification, but Carter defends the slower pace with a rare conviction, referencing international best practices, a phrase that sounds utterly foreign coming from his mouth. Furthermore, the emotional distance between them begins to thin in small, significant ways related to their personal narratives. Lee's unwavering commitment was fueled by the shadow of his mentor's failure. Carter, though outwardly successful, has always operated with a layer of surface-level defensiveness, masking deeper insecurities about his place in the serious law enforcement world. When they parted, they shared a silent recognition of this vulnerability. Lee saw that Carter's bravado was a shield, just as Carter understood that Lee's rigidity was an attempt to control the uncontrollable chaos that had claimed his teacher. This recognition creates an unspoken covenant. They will not judge each other's coping mechanisms, provided those mechanisms ultimately lead to the capture of the guilty. The shared experience of confronting systemic betrayal has bonded them beyond mere mutual respect. It's a solidarity rooted in shared disillusionment with the supposed infallibility of established systems. They both walk away understanding that true authority often resides not in the uniform or the badge, but in the commitment to an often messy, highly personalized form of justice. The bond forged under extreme pressure manifests in peculiar indirect forms across the miles separating them. Lee, back in his familiar, intensely structured world, finds himself occasionally drawn to American action films, not for their content, but to study the cinematography and pacing, looking for echoes of the chaos he briefly embraced. He's seeking to deconstruct the very energy Carter embodied, trying to isolate its tactical utility from its inherent noise. It's an academic exercise, perhaps, but one that shows he can look outside the established canon of his training. He finds a certain rhythm in the sheer kineticism that, while exhausting, was undeniably effective when precision failed. He might even have started incorporating a single, unorthodox move into his sparring repertoire, a move that Carter, with his penchant for improvisation, might have accidentally inspired through a clumsy imitation of something he once saw. For Carter, the adaptation is less about incorporating foreign techniques and more about internalizing a standard of excellence that transcends his former baseline. He can no longer simply rely on charm to smooth over investigative gaps. The memory of Lee's disappointed, laser-focused stare serves as an internal quality control mechanism. His desk might contain a small, almost hidden souvenir from Los Angeles, perhaps a cheap, slightly battered souvenir item that Lee had briefly examined and dismissed, which Carter now keeps as a talisman, a reminder that competence requires relentless upkeep. He starts taking his continuing education more seriously, perhaps even forcing himself through dense reports that he would have previously delegated or ignored, driven by a quiet fear of being found intellectually lacking when the next real crisis arises. The cultural exchange trickles down into their daily habits in surprising ways. Carter's taste in dining might momentarily skew towards the less greasy, perhaps even attempting to order something vaguely authentic from a local Asian establishment, only to find himself thoroughly confused by the menu, resulting in a quick, embarrassed retreat back to his usual comfort food. Meanwhile, Lee, in a moment of extreme stress during a high-stakes stakeout, might find himself muttering an English slang term, a poorly understood remnant of Carter's barrage of casual language, to himself, a tiny, unconscious acknowledgement of the cultural infiltration. These small anomalies are the true markers of their unlikely success. They didn't just share a case, they exchanged fundamental pieces of their professional DNA, ensuring that even separated by an ocean, they operate with a fractionally altered worldview. They are proof that true partnership is not about agreement, but about productive friction leading to adaptation. The long-term effect of their intense collaboration settles into a quiet, professional mythology surrounding both men. Within the LAPD, Carter's tales of Hong Kong begin to evolve. They shift from purely boastful anecdotes about outsmarting the local law to more nuanced accounts of Lee's unwavering focus under pressure. He stops emphasizing how much trouble he caused and starts referencing the discipline required to execute a flawless takedown, albeit framing it as a necessary evil he barely tolerated. His bravado remains a core part of his personality. It's the armor he always wears, but the substance beneath the performance gains a steelier core, a residue of Lee's influence. He becomes the reluctant mentor figure to newer, greener officers, dispensing advice that surprisingly includes caveats about patience and verifying the chain of evidence, much to the bewilderment of his old partners. In Hong Kong, Lee finds that his reputation has gained an unusual edge. His methodical approach is still lauded, but there's a new, almost mythical association with his handling of the American liaison. Whispers circulate that Inspector Lee successfully managed an agent completely outside the norms of structured policing, that he domesticated the American chaos. This doesn't change his adherence to duty, but it grants him an intangible level of authority. He can now command difficult situations with a slightly different timbre in his voice, one suggesting he has experience dealing with the truly unpredictable, having stared down the embodiment of disorder and categorized it. He still finds American procedural sloppiness frustrating, but now, when addressing a particularly reckless junior officer, he might offer a vague, almost philosophical warning about the necessity of understanding one's unpredictable environment, a caution learned from watching Carter thrive within it. The most profound, lingering detail is their shared understanding of true threat. They both encountered a form of betrayal that struck at the very foundation of their professional morality, Lee's mentor being the traitor, and Carter witnessing how easily the integrity of the investigation could be compromised by internal politics or incompetence. This shared knowledge creates a silent, unbreakable trust. If they were ever forced to work together again, there would be no preamble, no need for introductions or cultural pleasantries. They would simply fall into their synchronized rhythm, Lee establishing the meticulous perimeter and Carter utilizing the necessary noise to draw the enemy out. They are permanently etched as the ultimate odd couple, two halves of a perfectly functional, if wildly contrasting, policing unit, whose success proved that discipline and street savvy are not enemies but essential partners in the pursuit of obscured justice. The memory of their partnership settles into the quiet space of professional legend, becoming a benchmark against which future collaborations are implicitly measured and invariably found wanting. For Lee, the successful conclusion of the case validated not just his skills, but his inherent belief in the integrity of the martial and ethical path. Yet, this validation is tempered by the realization that true victory sometimes necessitates dipping into the murky waters of improvisation, a concept antithetical to his training. He carries forward a subtle but significant shift in his perspective on failure. An error isn't just a lack of discipline. It can sometimes be a lack of necessary adaptability, something Carter, in all his glorious messiness, possessed in abundance. He finds himself marginally more forgiving of small procedural slip-ups from his subordinates, viewing them less as personal affronts to order and more as potential, albeit risky, sources of actionable intelligence, echoing the necessary risk Carter always took. Carter, meanwhile, struggles less with his methods and more with the lack of genuine challenge in his day-to-day work following the massive adrenaline spike. He's become accustomed to operating at an elite, life-or-death level, making the bust of a mid-level narcotics dealer feel profoundly dull. He occasionally catches himself instinctively looking for Lee's silent, judging presence during chaotic traffic stops, half expecting the unflappable inspector to materialize and offer a perfectly executed countermaneuver to his own clumsy attempt at crowd control. This reliance on an absent partner forces Carter to confront his own capacity for sustained, low-key diligence. He starts reading manuals not because he has to, but because he fears the next time a situation demands Lee's level of complex, pre-planned engagement, he won't be ready. The swagger remains, yes, but it's now underpinned by a slightly more anxious diligence, the awareness that he has seen a higher standard of focused dedication and can no longer be entirely satisfied with merely good enough. Their influence on each other becomes apparent in their external representations. If one were to examine Lee's desk, one might find a small, slightly garish piece of Los Angeles memorabilia tucked away, perhaps a tacky postcard he intends to analyze for its cultural semiotics later, a testament to the strange things one keeps when facing down existential threats. Conversely, if one observed Carter's apartment, there might be a very precise, neatly organized shelf dedicated to materials related to Eastern martial arts philosophy. Not that he practices them, but that he now studies the underlying concepts of balance and focus, attempting to intellectualize the grace he witnessed. They never become the same man, nor do they fully assimilate each other's habits, which is crucial. Their strength was never conformity. Their success ensures that the cultural bridge they built remains standing, a silent testament that the most effective policing often happens at the intersection of disparate, seemingly incompatible worldviews. They are the living proof that sometimes the only way to see clearly is through a filter provided by someone who sees the world in an entirely different light. The passage of time only serves to further mythologize their fleeting alliance, turning concrete shared experience into almost folklore within their respective departments. For Lee, the internal narrative surrounding his time in L becomes a quiet source of strength. When faced with political maneuvering or bureaucratic gridlock in Hong Kong, situations where adherence to rigid form aids the corrupt, he recalls the sheer, untamed efficiency of Carter's rule-breaking. This memory doesn't encourage him to embrace anarchy, but rather grants him the confidence to apply pressure at unorthodox points, using his meticulous planning not just to follow the rules, but to strategically exploit the spaces between them. He develops a reputation for being slightly more unpredictable in high-level strategy meetings, his silence now carrying the weight of foreign, hard-won wisdom. He knows the chaos that lies just outside the neat lines of official procedure, and this knowledge makes him simultaneously more cautious and more daring. Carter, struggling to maintain that elevated sense of purpose, leans heavily into the legacy aspect of their partnership. He's discovered that leveraging the memory of Lee provides an instant credibility boost. When facing down a particularly stubborn or overly bureaucratic official, Carter will deploy a perfectly modulated, serious tone, a precise imitation of Lee's inflection, coupled with a brief, vague reference to cross-jurisdictional understanding or international protocol integration. It's theater, of course, but it's theater backed by genuine high-stakes success. His partners might chuckle, but they also notice that the tactic works. He still loves the spotlight, but now he understands that the most potent light is the one cast by someone else's unimpeachable discipline. He occasionally tries to mimic Lee's focused, almost meditative breathing during high-stress moments, only to immediately break it with a self-deprecating wisecrack before anyone can notice the jarring contrast between the attempt and his actual jittery energy. The deepest, most unspoken connection, however, lies in their shared experience of having their trust fundamentally shattered by betrayal. This transcends cultural differences. They both stared into the face of a trusted colleague turned adversary, and that shared intimacy with institutional cynicism creates a bond stronger than friendship. It means that in any future crisis, the first question for both men, regardless of jurisdiction, would implicitly be, who here is playing a long game? They both operate with a calibrated suspicion now, recognizing that the most sophisticated threats hide behind the most respected facades. This realization forces a kind of lonely vigilance upon them, but it is a vigilance they share across the Pacific. Ultimately, their legacy is that they became the definitive what-if scenario for their respective departments. If a case demands both flawless execution and the willingness to burn the rulebook, the hypothetical question always arises. What would happen if we paired the meticulous with the maniac? The answer, forever enshrined in their shared history, is profound success born from necessary friction. They never write long letters or make frequent calls. Their connection exists in the occasional, sharp, professionally coded email exchange across continents, a silent nod confirming that the necessary lesson was learned, and that somewhere across the globe, the other half of their improbable equation is still holding the line. The subtle, ongoing impact of their alliance trickles down into the very structure of their daily professional thought processes, manifesting not in grand gestures, but in infinitesimal, almost subconscious adjustments. For Lee, the concept of necessary inefficiency, that momentary lapse in perfect order which allows for a breakthrough, has become an integrated, if uncomfortable, part of his tactical toolkit. When reviewing surveillance footage, he no longer solely scrutinizes the meticulously planned routes. He finds himself actively searching for the Carter moments, the unplanned deviation, the sudden aggressive shift in focus that might betray an emotional tell the suspect was trying to mask with procedural correctness. His grief over his mentor has not vanished, but it has been channeled. The tragedy is no longer just a personal weight. It is an object lesson in how unchecked personal connections can corrupt structure. He begins to mentor younger officers with a specific, guarded analogy. The straightest path is not always the safest one. Sometimes you must learn the terrain so well you know exactly where the invisible wall is, so you know how precisely to step around it, not just against it. Carter, perpetually allergic to anything resembling formal introspection, finds Lee's influence manifesting in moments of near-silent, almost theatrical focus. During routine traffic stops that suddenly escalate, his usual instinct is to overwhelm the situation with noise and aggressive command presence. Now, however, there is a critical half-second lag. He's learned that the gap between reaction and response is where control is truly asserted. Colleagues might catch him briefly closing his eyes before engaging, a visual tic that baffles them, but which is, in reality, Carter attempting to invoke Lee's almost zen-like detachment before entering the fray. His swagger hasn't vanished. It's too integral to his identity, but it's become an amplifier for focused action rather than a shield against thought. He now approaches complex evidence analysis with a reluctant respect for detail, often muttering to himself, "All right, what would the inspector say about this smudge? Probably that I need stronger glasses, but still." The true emotional resonance lies in their shared, silent understanding of loneliness at the top. Both men, in their specialized ways, operate at a level of competency that isolates them from their peers. Lee's precision sets him apart. Carter's street genius often makes him too effective for the bureaucratic structure to comfortably contain. The L adventure gave them a temporary reprieve from that isolation. They found a singular peer who saw their flaws not as deficiencies, but as necessary components of a larger capability. This shared recognition means their rare communications, a brief text message months apart, usually triggered by a global news event related to organized crime, are incredibly dense. They don't waste words on pleasantries. A simple, "Heard about the operation in Manila." Clean work from Lee is the highest form of professional praise Carter can receive, while Carter's occasional cryptic link to an obscure American tech blog is Lee's way of acknowledging that he hasn't forgotten the landscape of modern improvisation. They are connected by the knowledge that when the stakes are existential, they are each other's only true confidant in effective execution. The unlikely pairing at the heart of Rush Hour, a 1998 action-comedy behemoth, owes its enduring appeal not just to the kinetic energy of its set pieces, but to the meticulously crafted friction between its two leads. Chris Tucker, fresh off a string of successful high-energy comedic roles, embodying the loud, fast-talking LAPD detective James Carter, acts as the necessary chaotic foil to Jackie Chan's Chief Inspector Lee, a meticulous, disciplined Hong Kong police officer parachuted into the bewildering landscape of Los Angeles. This cultural and methodological clash forms the engine of the narrative. Chan's presence here represents a significant moment in his Hollywood crossover. Having already established himself as a global martial arts icon through his Hong Kong productions, Rush Hour offered him a platform to integrate his signature acrobatic, slapstick-infused fight choreography directly into a major American studio picture. Lee is not merely a straight man, he is the embodiment of precise, physically grounded action, contrasting sharply with the film's Americanized aesthetic. His dedication to authentic physical performance, honed over decades of training and risk-taking in films like Drunken Master and Police Story, gives weight and visual poetry to sequences that might otherwise devolve into standard Hollywood fare. Tucker's Carter, on the other hand, is pure, unfiltered American bravado. His comedic style, relying heavily on rapid-fire banter, pop culture references, and an almost aggressive need to be the center of attention, was already well developed in his work in Friday and The Fifth Element. In Rush Hour, Carter is defined by his impatience and cultural insularity. He views Lee's formality with suspicion and condescension. The comedy arises organically from the gulf between Lee's unspoken professional code and Carter's unfiltered, rule-breaking exuberance. Carter is perpetually trying to one-up Lee verbally, while Lee consistently outmaneuvers him physically. The plot itself, the kidnapping of the Chinese consul's daughter and the ensuing need for cross-cultural cooperation, serves as a deliberately flimsy scaffolding for the buddy cop dynamic. Director Brett Ratner wisely understands that the audience is invested less in the resolution of the ransom demand and more in watching these two men learn to trust one another. The film draws heavily on established precedents in the buddy cop genre, echoing tropes found in classics like Lethal Weapon, but injects novelty through the racial and national differences. The fish-out-of-water element is exploited thoroughly, particularly in scenes where Lee is forced to navigate American bureaucracy or slang, often resulting in Tucker delivering punchlines to Chan's stoic reactions. Furthermore, the action sequences successfully merge the two stars' talents. While the film features standard shootouts and chases, the moments that shine are those where Chan is allowed to deploy his unique brand of combat. These fights are often ingeniously staged within mundane environments, a bustling market, a quiet museum, transforming everyday objects into martial arts props. When Carter occasionally gets drawn into the fray, it is usually through comedic timing or accidental effectiveness, reinforcing the idea that Lee is the true professional, the anchor of competence in their increasingly absurd partnership. Rush Hour ultimately succeeded by understanding that the dynamic, fueled by Tucker's irrepressible energy and Chan's grounded physical artistry, was more valuable than any complex narrative tapestry. It was a high-octane cultural translation project disguised as a successful action movie. The emotional resonance of Rush Hour stems from the slow, grudging erosion of mutual professional disrespect. Initially, the dynamic is defined by Carter's profound frustration. He views Lee as a bureaucratic hindrance, a self-serious relic from a less sophisticated policing era. Carter craves the limelight and resents being saddled with a partner who demands silence during surveillance and insists on following protocols that Carter considers painfully obsolete in the concrete jungle of Los Angeles. Tucker expertly projects this frustration, his vocal pitch rising with every perceived slight or moment of cultural misunderstanding. We see this clearly when Carter attempts to force cultural immersion upon Lee, whether through blasting loud American music in the car or forcing him into inappropriate social situations, attempting to break down Lee's impeccably constructed emotional armor. Lee, conversely, operates from a place of deep-seated sorrow and duty. While his stoicism is often played for laughs against Carter's antics, his underlying motivation, to rescue the consul's daughter, a mission tied to his personal history and respect for his superiors, lends him an integrity that Carter initially mocks but eventually admires. Chan portrays this internal struggle with subtle facial expressions, allowing brief flickers of vulnerability to escape his otherwise controlled demeanor. This restraint makes his eventual, albeit minor, emotional breakthroughs, like a reluctant smile or a shared moment of exhaustion after a major confrontation, feel earned. The audience roots not just for the resolution of the case, but for the moment Carter sees past the stiffness and recognizes the man beneath the impeccable uniform. The film's success in bridging these personalities lies in the shared threat, which forces collaboration over competition. Once they are actively fighting the same entrenched criminal organization, the differences that initially caused friction become complementary strengths. Lee's ability to anticipate complex, transnational criminal operations contrasts perfectly with Carter's street-level knowledge of LA's underbelly and his capacity to charm or bully necessary information out of reluctant sources. This interdependence gradually morphs their relationship from an obligatory pairing into a genuine friendship built on mutual survival. By the climax, Carter is defending Lee's honor, and Lee is occasionally employing a Carter-esque rhetorical flourish, showing that the cultural exchange has been a two-way street, even if Lee remains the significantly more disciplined participant. The visual language of the film consistently reinforces this contrast. Chan's fight scenes are characterized by wide shots that emphasize the choreography and the environment, demanding the viewer's attention to the physical narrative unfolding. Tucker's comedic beats, however, are often punctuated by tight close-ups, emphasizing his facial reactions and allowing the audience to fully absorb the absurdity of his commentary. Ratner manages the pacing so that the tension of the action sequences is always immediately followed by the catharsis of a comedic exchange, preventing the audience from dwelling too long on either the danger or the absurdity, keeping the energy level perpetually elevated. Rush Hour is a masterclass in pacing a partnership where two entirely different cinematic traditions are forced to share the same frame, ultimately making the synergy of action and comedy greater than the sum of their individual parts. The genuine connection forged between Carter and Lee transcends the typical action movie camaraderie. It becomes a commentary on the nature of partnership itself, suggesting that effective collaboration often necessitates embracing one's opposite. Carter's initial dismissal of Lee's methods as overly formal belies his deep-seated insecurity about his own lack of formal training. His constant need for noise and attention is, in many ways, a defense mechanism against the quiet competence radiating from his partner. When Carter is finally forced into a situation where his brashness fails him, often against Lee's calm, precise countermoves, we see the cracks in his facade. There is a poignant moment, usually following a particularly intense skirmish, where Carter's usual stream of wisecracks momentarily dries up, replaced by a look of genuine respect or even awe directed toward Lee's physical execution. This shared silence is more valuable than any line of dialogue Tucker delivers. Lee's character arc, though less outwardly flamboyant than Carter's, is equally crucial. His strict adherence to protocol is revealed to be a necessary bulwark against personal chaos. His dedication to the mission, which involves rescuing a girl akin to a surrogate sister, provides him with the focus he needs to operate in the bewildering, neon-drenched chaos of Los Angeles. The inspiration drawn from Chan's real-life persona, the meticulous preparation and dedication to avoiding injury where possible while performing astonishing feats when necessary, translates directly into Lee's on-screen professionalism. When Lee finally loosens up, often after a significant emotional breakthrough or a necessary victory, the change is subtle but profound. Perhaps it is his willingness to participate in a completely ridiculous American custom, or maybe it's the rare admission that Carter's instincts were actually useful, demonstrating that even the most disciplined mind can benefit from a jolt of American spontaneity. The film's success in balancing these disparate energies is also evident in the supporting cast, particularly June Temple, the FBI agent assigned to supervise them. She embodies the established American authority that both men, in their own ways, struggle against. She represents the middle ground that neither Carter's anarchic energy nor Lee's rigid discipline initially allows them to occupy. Her exasperation mirrors the audience's initial confusion, but as she witnesses their synergy in action, her role shifts from supervisor to reluctant admirer, validating the effectiveness of their unorthodox union. This validation is essential for the audience to fully invest in the partnership's evolution. The emotional payoff is achieved not when they solve the crime, but when they are ready to tackle the next case together, signifying that the cultural friction has annealed into functional harmony. The film leaves the viewer with a satisfying realization that this odd couple needed precisely the qualities the other lacked to succeed. The enduring legacy of Rush Hour is intrinsically tied to how it navigated the visual grammar of global action cinema, specifically by allowing Hong Kong-style martial arts cinema, characterized by precision editing and kinetic practical effects, to inhabit the sprawling, often looser cinematic framework of 1990s Hollywood blockbusters. The editing in the action sequences consciously shifts gears. When Lee is fighting, the camera work becomes sharper, adhering to the spatial clarity Chan demands in his fight choreography, ensuring every block, kick, and tumble is legible. This is in stark contrast to the looser, sometimes more chaotic framing often associated with American action cinema of the period. This visual discipline serves to elevate the action beyond mere spectacle into a demonstration of craft, a tribute to the art form Chan had championed for decades. Conversely, when Carter takes the lead, the visual style reflects his improvisational nature. His involvement often translates into sequences where the environment itself becomes part of the gag, forcing the audience to follow his manic energy rather than strictly charting the physical geometry of combat. Think of the sequence where Carter's ill-conceived plans invariably lead to property damage or unwanted attention. The camera often employs whip pans and exaggerated reaction shots tailored to Tucker's comedic timing. The genius of Ratner's direction lies in the seamless, often jarring transition between these two visual languages. One moment, we are engrossed in the fluid, balletic precision of Lee disarming a room full of henchmen with minimal effort. The next, we are caught in the frantic, explosive chaos initiated by Carter's blunder, where the danger is less about physical threat and more about narrative overload. This rhythmic oscillation between high-discipline action and high-energy comedy keeps the audience constantly readjusting their expectations, mirroring the adjustment required of the characters themselves as they learn each other's operating procedures. The film functions almost as a syllabus for cross-cultural understanding, taught through escalating physical comedy and impeccably executed fight scenes. The success of this visual dichotomy also profoundly impacts the audience's perception of vulnerability. When Lee is performing his signature moves, the camera celebrates his mastery, suggesting near invincibility within the confines of the martial arts narrative. This creates an emotional investment in his physical prowess. The audience anticipates the impossible and is rarely disappointed. However, this perfection sets the stage for greater dramatic impact when Lee is genuinely surprised or overwhelmed, moments often precipitated by Carter's chaotic interventions. A misplaced shout or a sudden ill-timed maneuver by Carter can break Lee's focus, allowing the Hollywood villains a momentary advantage. In these instances, Lee is suddenly rendered fallible, requiring Carter, the very source of the disruption, to offer the necessary distraction or brute force cover. This inversion of roles, the disciplined master needing the loudmouth for situational rescue, is the ultimate testament to their developing reliance on one another. Carter's moments of physical vulnerability are framed differently. They are rarely graceful. His pain or fear is usually played for immediate comedic relief, drawing sympathy through shared human clumsiness rather than admiration for honed skill. When Carter dives into action, it is often a desperate scramble, relying on luck or sheer audacity. Yet these moments serve a vital emotional purpose. They humanize him. By seeing him genuinely flustered or slightly injured, the audience recognizes that his bravado is partly a shield. Lee, observing this, often with a sigh of professional disappointment that barely masks underlying concern, begins to see Carter not as an annoyance, but as a highly motivated, albeit deeply flawed operative. This shared experience of near disaster, captured through these contrasting editing styles, solidifies the narrative's central theme, that true effectiveness in a partnership requires accepting and even utilizing the other's imperfections. The film thus masters the art of showing, rather than telling, that synergy is born from friction. The film's exploration of cultural stereotyping, while necessary for establishing the initial comedic conflict, cleverly evolves beyond simple mockery into mutual respect for deeply ingrained cultural work ethics. Carter's initial perception of Asian culture, heavily influenced by stereotypical media portrayals, paints Lee as repressed and overly formal. This perception is challenged by the sheer depth of Lee's training and dedication, which are rooted in a respect for tradition that Carter, embracing the transient nature of American pop culture, cannot initially comprehend. Lee's commitment to his mission, untainted by the need for immediate gratification or public applause, hallmarks of Carter's persona, slowly chips away at Carter's cynicism. Lee, in turn, is forced to confront the efficiency of American informality. While he initially views Carter's methods as crass, he must acknowledge that Carter's ability to navigate the murky gray areas of law enforcement through charm, bribery, or sheer audacity is a specialized skill set unattainable through rigorous martial arts training alone. The realization dawns that where Hong Kong cinema often demands perfect execution, the American environment sometimes rewards resourceful improvisation. This synthesis is most evident when they successfully infiltrate a location. Lee handles the physical entry and security neutralization with surgical precision, while Carter manages the human element, distracting guards or obtaining crucial last-minute information through rapid, persuasive conversation. Their shared moments outside of official duty, like the infamous attempts at American music appreciation or dining, function as micro-laboratories for their cultural integration. These scenes are deliberately awkward because they expose the characters' vulnerabilities outside their professional comfort zones. For Lee, these social settings represent unpredictability. For Carter, they represent a failure to control the narrative of their interaction. When Carter finally shows genuine concern for Lee's personal safety, rather than just his usefulness as a tool for the case, the emotional ledger balances. This shift is often signaled by Carter dialing back the volume of his voice, a subtle but monumental concession for his character, indicating that he values Lee's presence more than his own performance. Rush Hour thus functions as a sophisticated piece of cultural diplomacy, using explosions and slapstick to demonstrate that even the most rigid worldviews can bend under the pressure of shared adversity and necessary collaboration. The chemistry between Tucker and Chan in Rush Hour laid crucial groundwork for subsequent buddy cop iterations that sought to incorporate international flavor, demonstrating that racial and cultural differences could be mined for sustained comedic and dramatic tension without resorting to flat caricatures, provided the respect between the leads was earned. This earned respect is visually punctuated by the film's iconic closing moments. After the climactic confrontation, where both men have pushed their professional and personal limits, their final exchange is often marked by a mutual weariness that transcends their earlier antagonistic banter. It is a weariness born of genuine risk endured side by side. Carter, who began the film treating Lee as an anthropological curiosity, now treats him as a peer whose methods, however alien, saved his life. This maturation is subtle in Carter, but more visible in his actions. He begins to mimic Lee's quiet professionalism in small ways, perhaps by offering a brief, disciplined nod instead of a loud declaration, or by momentarily silencing himself during a tense stakeout. A clear admission that Lee's disciplined approach has merit. Lee, having absorbed some of Carter's assertive flexibility, demonstrates his acceptance by engaging in a moment of shared, unscripted humor, often directly at the expense of the villain or the recently subdued situation. This final alignment suggests a harmonious synthesis, the disciplined foundation of the East blended with the improvisational energy of the West, creating a policing unit exponentially more effective than either man operating in isolation. The film ends not just with a solved case, but with the unspoken promise of future, mutually beneficial collaboration, cementing the appeal of the mismatched duo as a cinematic formula capable of reinvention. The undercurrent of mentorship that subtly flows beneath the comedic surface of Rush Hour is perhaps its most enduring emotional anchor. Lee, despite his youth, relative to some of his American counterparts, occupies the role of the seasoned master, a position earned through rigorous, almost spiritual devotion to his craft. His disappointment in Carter is frequently parental. He sees immense raw talent and potential buried beneath a mountain of ego and lack of discipline. This is not just professional critique, it is a lament for wasted potential. When Lee takes the time to painstakingly correct Carter's sloppy gun handling or explain the principles behind a particular maneuver, he is investing in Carter's future, recognizing that the American detective possesses a raw adaptability that, if refined, could make him formidable. Carter, in turn, views Lee's instruction with the reluctant reverence of a prodigy being forced to learn scales before being allowed to jam. His rebellion against structure is rooted in a fear of constraint, a feeling that formality suffocates the spontaneity required to catch criminals in a fast-moving metropolis. However, as the film progresses, Carter begins to internalize Lee's lessons, not by becoming rigid, but by injecting discipline into his chaos. We see this when Carter manages to control his impulse to immediately shoot first, choosing instead to deploy a carefully planned distraction that borrows from Lee's tactical playbook. This borrowing is the highest compliment he can pay, adopting a technique from the man he initially dismissed as hopelessly stiff. The relationship blossoms most significantly when external threats push them past the point of performance. In the trenches of genuine danger, the artifice drops away. When Carter is genuinely in peril, his frantic calls for help are answered not with a lecture, but with immediate, selfless protective action from Lee, demonstrating that the bond has moved beyond professional obligation into fraternal commitment. Similarly, Lee's occasional breaking of protocol, perhaps bending a rule to secure a critical piece of evidence faster, is tacitly approved by Carter, signifying that Carter has successfully demonstrated the necessity of adaptation to Lee. This symbiotic reliance solidifies the film's message. True partnership requires not imitation, but integration of opposing strengths, creating a third, more resilient entity forged from cultural exchange and shared adrenaline. The economic realities of Hollywood filmmaking also played a critical role in shaping the dynamic, specifically regarding how the film needed to maximize the appeal of both its established international star and its rising domestic comedic talent. Jackie Chan commanded a certain expectation of sustained, consequence-free physical action, which served as the film's visual punctuation mark. This meant that the script, consciously or not, had to engineer scenarios where only Chan's unique skill set could resolve the immediate physical crisis, thus justifying his billing and fulfilling audience expectations forged over decades in Hong Kong. Conversely, Chris Tucker's value lay in his ability to provide narrative propulsion through dialogue, ensuring that even during lulls in the action, the energy level remained high enough to satisfy the contemporary American multiplex audience. His constant stream of commentary acts as a necessary auditory overlay, preventing the more intricate martial arts sequences from feeling too alienating to viewers unaccustomed to the pace of pure Hong Kong action cinema. This structural division, Chan handles the physical exposition, Tucker handles the verbal interpretation and cultural mediation, is a deliberate cinematic strategy. The producers effectively hedged their bets. If the martial arts weren't sufficiently appreciated, the comedy would carry the load, and vice versa. This dual-pronged approach ensured a wider demographic reach than either star could have achieved in a solo project in the opposing market. The result is a film that is fundamentally two different genres running parallel tracks, a martial arts showcase tethered to a rapid-fire American comedy, and the friction of their convergence is precisely what generates the exhilarating, sustainable momentum of Rush Hour. The setting itself, the sprawling, often overwhelming landscape of Los Angeles, functions as an external antagonist against which the partnership must first unite. For Chief Inspector Lee, the city is a labyrinth of incomprehensible noise, superficiality, and lax security, a profound shock to the sensibilities honed in the tightly controlled, high-stakes environment of Hong Kong. His discomfort is palpable, the bright lights feel aggressive, the casual friendliness of strangers feels insincere, and the sheer volume of unregulated activity is a constant assault on his meticulously ordered world. This external disorientation mirrors his internal struggle to navigate Carter's unpredictable orbit. Lee is a man whose competence relies on predictability. L offers none. Carter, however, is entirely at home in this chaos. He is the city's native language, fluent in its slang, its shortcuts, and its systemic flaws. His confidence is rooted in his ability to manipulate the very chaos that paralyzes Lee, yet his environment also reveals his limitations. When the case demands transnational intelligence or sophisticated forensic analysis, Carter is exposed as intellectually shallow, relying on instinct rather than procedure. His reliance on shortcuts often puts them one step behind the sophisticated criminals, forcing him to reluctantly cede control to Lee's methodical approach when street smarts fail. This symbiotic need for the other's expertise becomes acutely apparent during moments of necessary disguise or cross-cultural negotiation, where Carter's ability to charm his way into a situation is balanced by Lee's ability to read threat indicators that Carter, blinded by superficial charm, entirely misses. The city, therefore, is not just a backdrop. It is the crucible that forces these two dissimilar methods of operation to either fuse or fail. The evolving dialogue between Carter and Lee serves as a running commentary on American versus Asian approaches to authority and respect, often revealed through their differing interpretations of professional etiquette. Carter's habitual use of nicknames and casual familiarity, even with superiors, is a deliberate transgression against the hierarchical structure Lee embodies. Lee's preference for direct address and formal adherence to titles is a manifestation of deep respect for institutional stability, a concept Carter views as cumbersome red tape. The humor derived from this clash is rich, but underneath it lies a cultural lesson. Carter's casualness, while endearing to his peers, actively hinders Lee's ability to gain traction with the more traditional elements of the FBI liaison team, forcing Lee to constantly operate at a disadvantage in unfamiliar territory. Furthermore, the film subtly critiques the American obsession with immediate gratification through Carter's impatience. He is constantly pushing for the next lead, the quickest resolution, often ignoring subtle clues that demand patience and observation, skills Lee possesses in abundance. Lee's stillness during observation, often misinterpreted by Carter as boredom or apathy, is actually a form of intense data absorption. This contrast highlights the thematic importance of pacing. Carter's world moves at the speed of television news cycles, demanding instant fixes, while Lee's world moves at the speed of rigorous training, demanding mastery over time. When they finally achieve synergy, it is because Carter learns the value of waiting for the precise moment to act, Lee's technique, and Lee learns the necessity of seizing an imperfect moment before the opportunity vanishes, Carter's adaptation. This integration of tempo is the final hurdle they must clear to become a truly effective unit, transforming from an irritating pairing into an indispensable tandem whose combined rhythm sets them apart from conventional law enforcement pairings. The tension around cultural appropriation and appreciation forms another subtle yet powerful layer beneath the surface action. Carter's initial attempts to Americanize Lee are less about genuine friendship and more about forceful assimilation. He's attempting to mold Lee into a version of an American cop he understands, one that can laugh at the same jokes and share the same swagger. When Carter forces Lee into those ridiculously oversized sunglasses or tries to teach him complicated American slang, there's a flicker of underlying insecurity. If Lee remains perfectly inscrutable and aloof, Carter fears he will remain permanently irrelevant to the mission and to Lee's respect. Lee's reaction to these forced cultural imports is a fascinating study in passive resistance. He complies just enough to keep the investigation moving, his polite nods masking deep internal confusion, or even mild offense. Yet, when Lee later utilizes a piece of Carter's advice, perhaps employing a clumsy but effective bluff that saves them time, or using a piece of American pop culture knowledge, however misinterpreted, to gain rapport with a low-level informant, it signifies a profound, unspoken acknowledgement. It's not that Lee has become Americanized, but that he has successfully categorized Carter's chaotic energy as a valid, specialized tool within his own arsenal. This moment of appropriation, where Lee consciously deploys a Carterism, is far more meaningful than any forced compliment, showing he values the utility of the cultural exchange, even if he doesn't embrace the culture wholesale. The audience recognizes that Lee is not just learning to fight better, he is learning to operate in a new reality, using Carter as his unwilling cultural translator. while simultaneously teaching Carter the value of internal focus over external noise. The true depth of their evolving trust is perhaps most beautifully articulated in the shared silence during moments of profound danger, a silence that speaks volumes precisely because their usual dynamic is so saturated with noise. When the plan inevitably collapses, usually due to Carter's overzealous participation or Lee's momentary adherence to a too-perfect plan, and they find themselves cornered, their nonverbal communication becomes instantaneous and absolute. There is no time for the familiar, exasperated crosstalk. Instead, their eyes lock, and in that fraction of a second, a full tactical briefing occurs. Carter reads the subtle tension in Lee's shoulders, understanding precisely which piece of environmental chaos he needs to create to provide Lee the necessary millimeter of advantage. Lee, observing the slight, almost imperceptible tightening around Carter's jaw, knows exactly which direction Carter is about to launch his unpredictable, desperate charge. These near-death experiences strip away the cultural scaffolding. They are no longer Hong Kong inspector versus LAPD detective. They are simply two highly trained individuals operating under extreme duress, relying on instinct refined by shared survival. Following one such harrowing escape, where Carter perhaps takes an unnecessary but ultimately successful blow to draw fire, the aftermath is telling. Carter's usual flippancy is momentarily muted by residual adrenaline, and he might offer a ragged, almost breathless, "Thanks, partner." The word partner, a term Carter usually throws around with careless abandon, is delivered with a gravity that suggests a lifelong oath. Lee's response is never effusive. Instead, he might simply adjust the positioning of his own equipment, a small, deliberate action that communicates, "We are safe now. Your recklessness was calculated and it worked. For now." This shared understanding that one's flaws can, in the right hands, become strategic assets is the ultimate emotional dividend of their partnership, proving that authenticity, even when abrasive, trumps practiced performance every time. The enduring mythology surrounding the film is further cemented by the meticulously crafted nature of its antagonists, who serve as necessary foils to the lead's developing synthesis. The primary villain, Thomas Griffin, embodies the seamless, polished threat of transnational crime operating within the superficial sheen of American high society, a direct contrast to the tangible, grounded threats typically faced in Hong Kong cinema. Griffin represents the ultimate challenge to Lee's disciplined world, a villain whose power lies not in martial prowess, but in systemic influence, wealth, and deception. He is a ghost operating behind polished mahogany desks, accessible only through the messy, often illegal means that Carter excels at navigating. This villain demands that Lee utilize Carter's methods: intel gathering via informal channels, mild coercion, and operating outside official purview, because the direct, honorable approach favored by Hong Kong law enforcement is completely ineffective against a target shielded by layers of corporate legality. Conversely, Griffin's sophistication forces Carter to elevate his own game. He cannot simply charm or bluff his way past Griffin's security apparatus. He must rely on Lee's technical skills and disciplined observation to uncover the actual operational blueprint beneath the surface glamour. The narrative thus positions the villain as the ultimate catalyst for synergy. He is a threat too complex for either man to face individually. Griffin forces Lee to embrace the necessary grime of the American procedural, and he forces Carter to engage with the necessary depth of international conspiracy, ensuring that the resolution of the conflict requires the absolute fusion of their disparate skill sets, rather than the triumph of one style over the other. The film's triumph in balancing these opposing forces is underscored by the recurring motif of misunderstanding translated into breakthrough. The initial scenes are littered with instances where Lee misinterprets Carter's cultural cues, leading to comical but career-threatening errors. For instance, Lee might interpret Carter's enthusiastic clap on the shoulder as an aggressive challenge, prompting a near-reflexive defensive posture that startles onlookers. Carter, oblivious, simply sees it as camaraderie. This pattern is meticulously unwound throughout the narrative. By the third act, when the stakes are at their highest and any miscommunication could mean catastrophe, their body language becomes almost telepathic. A quick, almost imperceptible nod from Carter during a tense standoff is now understood by Lee not as agreement, but as a coded signal that the perimeter is weaker on the left flank, necessitating a specific trajectory for Lee's acrobatic entry. This evolution in nonverbal communication reflects a deep emotional realignment. Lee, who once registered Carter's presence as mere static, disrupting his focus, now seeks out that very energy, viewing it as essential turbulence that keeps him sharp and aware of the unpredictable. Carter, conversely, has learned to harness his own kinetic energy, channeling his inherent restlessness into strategic, rather than purely reactive, movements. The shift is visible in their shared moments of downtime, often lingering in the frame just after a major action sequence. Where before there was heavy breathing and mutual exasperation, there are now shared, knowing glances